Hello guys, Rob here, Raising Reef. So much has changed with this tank since the last episode, so we've got a lot to get through, so let's just get straight into it. So in the last episode we did the instant cycle and we tracked the ammonia and the nitrite and the nitrate levels, and we had complete success with the nitrogen cycle. It was an instant cycle with the bottle of Dr. Thames. We put in twice as much as we needed and it did the trick perfectly. None of the fish suffered as a consequence of going in immediately, and we had no ammonia in the system for the 5 weeks that I tracked it. Nitrite levels rose to about 4 parts per million before dropping back down to about 1 or 2 parts per million. It's not really a big deal. If they get above 5, it can be problematic with the ammonia, but we didn't face that and it was all fine. The nitrate levels slowly rose to about 10. I did a water change, they rose again, I did another water change, and by the time I was ready to go and collect all of my stock from my old tank, they'd got to about 50 parts per million. Now that's pretty high, but it was to be expected because the only thing taking nitrate out of this system up until that point was me changing the water. And it's not the most efficient way of keeping nitrates in check, so now that we've got everything moved over and the system running, those nitrates have dropped right back down to about 2 to 5 parts per million, which is perfectly acceptable. I don't like to keep them too low. All of these things are needed within the system for the corals to grow, and we don't want to starve them, so that's where we're at. So about 10 days ago I took a trip down to where I used to live, where my friend has been looking after my old reef tank for over a year. I packed up my car, I did the 82-mile journey down to him, took about an hour and a half. I spent the next 4.5 hours dismantling the old tank, bagging up the corals and the fish, packing them into poly boxes, breaking down all the tank and draining it, and packing as much of the stuff into my car as I could. I managed to get everything in the car from that system apart from the old tank, the old stand and the old sump. Those have subsequently been given away to somebody on the local reef forum down in Essex, and somebody is going to make use of those, I'm sure. I didn't need them anymore, and it would have been another 82 miles there and back to go and pick it up at a later date, and it would have just been sitting around in my mate's garage. He'd already put up with my tanks for long enough, so I thought, give it away, get someone else to get some use out of it, rather than me bring it home and store it for ever and a day. Probably end up taking it to the dump. So all of the corals went into the tank about 10 days ago, and they settled in reasonably quickly. We did have a few upset corals from the old tank, bringing them over to the new tank because the old tank had been through a few small issues. We had a calcium reactor issue that caused alkalinity swings. We had a return pump issue that caused me to have to go down there and replace that. And we had an auto top-off issue, which we had to replace the auto top-off. Apart from that, my friend had a little bit of a problem with his RO unit, and we believe that he somehow contaminated his tank and my tank, and we lost all of the SPS corals that were in there. I will recolonise the tank with SPS in the future, but for now all we've got is what I brought over from the old system, which is the LPS corals and some soft corals. But we'll have a look at those and see what's in the tank. They're all looking pretty good. Some of them not as good as they used to, but I'm sure they'll get back to good health in no time. I took all of the old rock and the sand from my old system and I brought it over and put it into what is going to be my frag tank. Well, it actually is my frag tank because we've got some frags in there, but initially it was for holding the rock and the sand from my old system, because all of that rock and sand has got all of the goodness, all of the bacteria and the little critters that live amongst the rock and in the sand. I do a great job at creating a biodiversity within the reef system, and when you start a tank with inert, dry rock, dry sand, and it's relying on you to add the stuff, I think that having some real live rock that's mature and has all of the sponges and all of the good stuff that grows on it is essential for a well-balanced system. So all of that stuff was brought over. It was too precious to not bring and find a space for, so that's all living in the frag tank, and it's doing a good job at stabilising the system, while the new rock that creates the structure in the main display has a chance to get seeded and established within the system. Another small problem that we had in the old tank was hair algae. For some reason, all of a sudden, hair algae started to grow in the tank, and it was profusely. Even though we had the refugium running and the caulerpa was still growing, that hair algae just wasn't keeping in check. And I found out subsequently, since bringing the refugium over and setting it up on the new system, that I think I found out the problem. There's a little nozzle in the refugium at the back, which has a little pump in the back chamber which pushes all the water through into the front part. That was clogged up, so all of the water that was being pushed into the refugium and then draining out wasn't really getting an opportunity to get circulated around the front part where the caulerpa is growing, and therefore that caulerpa wasn't having the opportunity to suck up those nutrients and starve out the hair algae. So now that we've cleaned that little nozzle out, and we're getting good flow through there, wow, what a difference. We've seen caulerpa almost fill this little tank within a week. I'll show you a clip. If you check that out, there it is. That shows you 24 hours after we'd set it up. That's how it went in to the tank, and as you can see, the leaves on that look pretty dark. And since then, if we have a look at the refugium now, this is about 10 days later, look at the difference. That's a lot of growth, that's a lot of nitrates and phosphates locked up in the tissue of the algae, and we can manually remove that and dump it out of the system continuously for a natural way to reduce the nitrates and phosphates within the system without having to rely on water changes. So let's take a little look at the system as a whole, and then we will concentrate on what corals we've put into the main display. Okay, so that's the system as a whole. We've got the main display in the middle. To the left of that we've got the refugium, and to the right of it we've got the frag tank. We start off with the refugium now. That's all the new growth. So if we take a look at the main display, that's how it looks from the front, with all the new corals, or my old corals, into the new tank. That's my large frog spawn colony that the clowns live in and lay their eggs at the bottom of. Just below that is my maize coral. There's a few little polyps underneath there. That is supposed to be green star polyps. You can just see some little green flecks here and there. That for some reason lost all of its colour, and we're hoping that that will regain its colour at some point in the future, because it certainly doesn't look as nice as it used to. Next to that is my green lobo. That seems to be doing okay. It's nice and puffed up. It opens up to feed. I'm not really concerned about that one, it's doing really well. My Duncan's colony is looking a shadow of its former self. It's a lot smaller than it used to be, but it does have, if you look in there, a lot of new little heads sprouting out around all of the bigger heads, so I'm sure it's going to come back thick and fast in the near future. Just behind that we've got some zoas. That is my colony of red blastomosa. Yes, again, that's got a big dead patch on the top there where it's suffered, but there's still enough life left in it to really grow over the top of that and come back given a bit of time. My multicoloured lobo just above that. That one was one piece of, that was two pieces of one coral. The one came off. This one was in my tank the whole time. This one got moved when my friend had an issue with his RO water over to a friend's house, and he was taking care of that for probably 6 to 8 months. And as you can see, it looks quite different to that one. I'm sure they'll both sterilise out. It seems to have more colour, but it's a lot tighter and it's a bit receded. Whereas normally in my tank it would have been all open and fluffy like that one, all puffed up. So we'll see how that gets on in the coming weeks. In the middle there we have my green torch coral. That has lost a couple of heads. If we spin around the side here, you'll see on the back there a few of the heads have died, but there are still quite a few heads there, and it's looking quite good there in the centre of the tank. Just to the side of that we have my candy cane coral. I did have quite a few large colonies of this growing in the tank. They grew from tiny little sprigs that I had, and they've done really well. I've kept one in this main display, quite a large piece, and the rest I've fragged up to be moved on to other tanks. Behind that we have the pink Setosa Montipora, and that had taken the opportunity to grow over the top of all of the other SPS corals that were at the top of the tank that had died off, and now we ended up with a big shelf of that. I've kept one piece there. I've probably got about the same again, and another piece about half that size in the frag tank. I'll show you those in a minute, but they will be moved on to another tank. I don't need a whole tank full of the same coral. Over the back there, you know, look, we've got the Starfire, I think they're called, bubble tip anemone. That's doing really well over there. That's quite a large one. There are 5 in the tank in total. There was 6, but my friend has taken one to put into his tank. I've kept 3 in here, and I've got 2 in the frag tank, ready again to be moved on, swapped with somebody else. You can see one of them over there. The rest of the stuff around here, like this fluffy stuff here, is supposed to be green star polyp, but as you can see, it's not very green. Right, what we got under here? That is a colony of red cherry bomb zoas. It's doing okay. And that is what the tank looks like from this side. The 2 firefish are doing well. They're enjoying the fact that the tank is a little bit more full up, and they're out all of the time now. They seem a little bit more comfortable in the tank with other fish in there and lots of coral to swim amongst. Probably a bit more natural for them than the stark, lifeless tank that they started off in. But they seem quite happy in there. They hang out together. They seem to be like they're a pair, and they sleep in the same burrow together. And if we look behind there on the ground, we've got the yellow watchman goby that I added to replace the peacock wrasse that didn't make it, that was damaged when we put it in the tank, and he's been doing really well. The tail spot blenny is around somewhere. I did see him picking over the back just before we started, and he lives just next to the red cherry bonzos, if we can get a focus on him. And his head is usually poking out somewhere in there, if we see him. Can you just see him in there? You might see him come out if we feed the tank in a little bit, but other than that, yeah, the tank's looking pretty good. The corals are looking nice. The new sand bed is pretty much just dry sand, so it's now starting to get diatoms and a little bit of algae form on it. Very much unlike the mature sand that I brought over from my old tank, which is clean as a whistle, but that's the benefit of having all of the colonies of bacteria and spaghetti worms processing the sand without the need for any siphoning or stirring up. But that will get there in time. I might have to move some of the sand over from the other tank to seed it, just to speed that process up. But once they're established in there, that tank will, the sand will go nice and clear. If we look behind there, there's another one of the anemones on the rockwork there, and there is another one. If we look up, you might just be able to see it. I don't think it's going to focus on it. Right in the middle of the shot there, it's out of focus. But there's another anemone tucked back there. That's how the tank is looking from this side. Everything's nice and spaced out. It's got a little bit of room to grow, and there's still plenty of room at the back there for me to mount SPS corals to grow up into the water column above. The flow in this tank is provided by the return lines that come out in each corner, and we also have 2 MP10s which are turned right down low, because if we turn them up too high they create a sandstorm and dig holes in the sand. But we've got plenty of flow going on. As you can see, the corals bobbing around, and it keeps all of the food suspended in the tank where it can work its way through the system. So if we have a little look in the frag tank, as you can see, we've got all of the rock from my old tank moved over. There's one of the anemones I've put in there until I can be moved on to someone else, and there's another one there. I've got a couple of frog spawn little mini colonies there that are ready to be moved on, and I've got quite a lot of the frog spawn that I broke up. There's a big piece over the back here I need to clean up because it's got a fair bit of hair algae still growing on it, and the Setosa has also got some hair algae still growing on it that I need to clean off. And there's some other little bits and bobs. That's supposed to be green star polyp, but again that's all lost its colour, and there's some little colonies of zoas and bits and bobs knocking around inside here. There's also an MP10 creating some circulation within this tank, and again that's turned down super low because it's only a small tank. It just provides enough to keep the corals moving around. So that's all the livestock we've moved over from the old system to the new system, and I must say I think it's looking pretty good. Everything's settled in really well, but there's always room for improvement. In the coming weeks and months I will be going coral shopping, and I will be adding some new colonies to the tank, maybe some frags, whatever it is I can get that is what I want, and we will be growing those up over the coming months to see how they settle into the tank and what we can create as far as a tank display is concerned. When I moved the tank light over from the old system, that's the AI Hydra 26 HD that I'm running on this tank, and I've got it mounted on the AI flex arm bracket, which I really like as well. When I dismantled the tank and I took the light off, I noticed that a couple of the LEDs had burned the lenses, and I was fearful that I might have to replace the unit, but after a little bit of digging around on the internet and asking on the forum, somebody put me in the right direction, and I got hold of a couple of new lenses from, I believe it's from D&D Aquarium Solutions. They seem to be the go-to place for AI spares and equipment in this country. And I managed to pick up a pair of lenses to replace the burnt ones for, I think it was £22 including postage, so not that expensive in comparison to having to replace the light, so I'm really pleased about that. Look forward to a future episode where I'll be adding those onto the old light and seeing if we can make it brand new again. I've got a calcium reactor running on the system, which is new to the system, new to me. I've dumped the old one, well, I've cleaned it up and I've put it to one side. It was a bit rickety. We've got a new bubble Magus, I think it's a 110 or something like that, that we are running with a CO2 canister regulator and pH controller. I need to order a new probe for that and calibrate it and all the rest of the stuff, but we will be showing you that in a future episode. I've got a new NIOS 120 skimmer that I'm running on the system, which I've been fiddling around with and trying to settle in, and we will be looking at that a little bit closely in a future episode also. So if you want to see how this progresses in the coming weeks and months and check out the rest of the equipment that's on the system, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel and like this video if you enjoyed it, share it, all the things that they ask you to do on YouTube. It all helps the channel out. If you want to help support this channel, then you can just share it, like it, or do all the things. And that pretty much concludes this video. So stay safe everybody, take it easy, and I will see you next time.